The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the sixth webinar. This webinar is entitled Taking Advantage of Opportunities and Avoiding Pitfalls in Academia, Thinking Pragmatically and Programmatically About Your Career. And we have the great fortune to have Ken Levy here to present for us today. I want to give a couple of quick guidelines for people who haven't done this before. In your control panel, you will see a bunch of different options. I want to bring your attention first to the part of the control panel where you can see your name along with the names of other attendees, the attendee list. In that part of the panel, you'll have the opportunity to be able to raise your hand if you have a question. That's one way for you to signal me and Kim that you have a question you'd like us to make sure that Ken sees. So if you raise your hand, we can open up your microphone actually and let you ask your question. The other panel that I'd like to bring your attention to is the questions panel. In that panel, you can write up what question you have and then send it. When you send it, Kim and I will take a look at that. And if it's a technical question, if you're having difficulties with your microphone or difficulties hearing things or seeing things, Kim will work to help you resolve that. And if you have a question for Ken, if you type it in there, I'll make sure that, that Ken sees the question and then maybe open up your microphone so that you can have a chat with Ken to get some follow-up on the question. So the other thing that we're going to do is at one point during the presentation, we will open up a poll. The poll will appear automatically on your screen, and all you have to do is select one of the poll options, and that'll generate just a quick poll response for Ken to see, and it'll help him sort of guide the way he constructs his talk. Let me just briefly introduce Dr. Levy, and I'm going to have to go back and forth between my laptop screen. Actually, I'm going to steal my laptop. All right. So Dr. Levy is currently an associate professor at Penn State University in the Adult Clinical Psychology program. He earned his PhD from the City University of New York in 1999. And had his clinical internship and postdoctoral fellowship through the Weill Medical College of Cornell University. He was recently named an associate editor of the Journal of Psychotherapy Integration. Importantly, as this is an SPR webinar, he was given in 2008 in Barcelona the SPR Early Career Award. He was also awarded in 2008 the Early Career Award from Division 29, which is the Division of Psychotherapy of the American Psychological Association. Ken Levy has co-authored over 70 peer-reviewed journal articles and nearly 40 book chapters. And I'm going to turn it over to Ken to talk with you guys about getting started on early career challenges and opportunities.
Thank you very much, Sam, for that lovely introduction, and thank you, Sam and Kim, both for thinking of me for this opportunity. I'd like to apologize in advance for two things. One is I realize that many of the attendees are from Europe, and my expertise is not necessarily in the European system. And I will hopefully much of what I say is relevant for those attending from Europe or other countries outside the United States. I think much of it will be, but some may be slightly different, and I'm certainly willing to entertain questions and think with you about how some of those differences might be present different types of challenges and might be addressed. Additionally, I'm getting over a cold, so I hope that my voice isn't too nasal or too soft, and people may not be able to hear me well, but I'll try to speak up loud. I have water here with me, which I may need to take a sip of every once in a while, so if I hesitate, that's probably what I'm doing. With that said, I think we can get started. The plan is for me to present for about an hour. I think I have enough material for that, for sure. People are obviously able to ask questions throughout and make comments that Sam and Kim will have access to and sort of feed to me. In addition, there'll be about a half-hour question and answer opportunity towards the end, where we could talk about specific issues that people are grappling with or specific questions in that time. So I'd like to start off and sort of share with you my enthusiasm about an academic career. I think that academic careers are very exciting. Interestingly, when I was a kid, I didn't necessarily want to grow up to be a rock star or an actor, but actually thought about wanting to actually contribute to knowledge as an academic, strange as it may sound. Many of you may have had the same fantasy. But actually being an academic and having an academic career is exciting in that you're answering important questions. And if you're the kind of person that spends a lot of time thinking about various things that are interesting to them, then this is really a good career for you. We develop and create knowledge. We contribute to the greater good of society with our knowledge. We're reasonably well compensated. I say reasonably because we're not well compensated in relation to how much education we have. We have much more education than most people, and we sort of top out at levels that aren't equivalent to what maybe people who work on Wall Street or places like that might make. But generally speaking, a full professor probably makes somewhere in what would be the equivalent of $100,000 here in the United States or more. At this point, starting salaries at Penn State for assistant professors are about $80,000, and I would say that's anywhere between $60,000 and $75,000 is the starting salary in academia. So that's reasonably well paid when you consider what most people might make. We travel a lot, much of which may be paid for, making our incomes go further. And we meet a lot of smart, caring, and like-minded people, and it's just a really nice lifestyle. I feel fortunate. Every day when I wake up in the morning, I feel lucky to be doing what I'm doing. When I consider certainly the kind of things that most people are doing here in the United States or even across the world. And I joke with my students that if I was to win lotto today, and I don't know if lotto is something that translates to other countries, but it's a lottery system where you spend $1 and you have an opportunity to win $1 million, and it's something that's quite popular here in the United States. I imagine other places. If I was to win lotto, I joke with them that I would be back in my office the next morning at 7 o'clock, just like I usually am. The only difference is that I would be dressed better, drive up in a nicer car, and have a better haircut. Okay, so I'm not the only one who thinks this. Money Magazine actually rated the top 10 best jobs, and we're really fortunate in psychology because psychology, or psychologist and college professor, were actually two of the top best jobs, according to Money Magazine. See, college professor number 2, psychologist number 10. I think those salaries are a little bit lower than what they actually are, but maybe that's true of the other disciplines too. They rated various aspects of these careers, and creativity and flexibility were rated very high. A corresponds to excellent, B to very good, C to more difficult. Entry into the field was actually difficult in both cases, and stress was actually rated okay for college professors. I would beg to differ with that, at least with regard to pre-tenure. Maybe post-tenure that's more consistent with. But suffice it to say, we really have a great opportunity here going into psychology as academics. Now, that was the good. The bad is that academic jobs are very difficult to obtain. On average, people spend about 7.5 years to obtain their PhD. They spend more time in addition to actually getting postdoctoral experience. And the number of jobs out there in the United States, I've typically noted, is about 80 jobs for clinical psychologists at the assistant professor level. But with the economy in recession, The number of jobs has decreased. Last year, I think there was only about 40 jobs available, although there's signs that this year there are many more jobs. Eventually, the jobs will have to come back. A, the economy will improve, hopefully, but B, there is a second but smaller baby boom coming up. Or kids of that age will be going to college, and they'll need more professors, most likely, unless we're all replaced by online professors, which I don't think will happen. One of the strange things, though, in our field, however, is that we get very little explicit training on how to manage our careers. It's really an implicit process. We watch our mentors and we take in information incidentally. I think that this is starting to change, and people are becoming much more explicit about these processes, but really it's been an implicit process. There isn't a lot written about it, and much of us rely on luck. And what I mean by that is that we're taking advantage of opportunities that come up without necessarily being planful about those opportunities and making opportunities for ourselves and so forth. But one of the sayings that I've always liked, which is attributed to a man named Branch Rickey, actually it's been by other people have said similar things, is this idea that luck favors the prepared. And if one is very well prepared, when these opportunities present themselves, one is able to take advantage of them. And if one is prepared in being thoughtful about various opportunities that might present themselves and might exist, then one can really take advantage of these opportunities. Now, there is some written about this issue. There is a book written originally by John Darley and Mark Zana, and now with Henry Roediger, called The Complete Academic. And this is a really important book for everyone in graduate school who's a postdoc or even an assistant professor to actually read. I was fortunate enough to find it on accident. I was lucky. And no one actually told me to go out actually and buy this book. I found it. And it really opened my eyes to what the academic process is like and what it's about, including things about going on job interviews. And one of the big pieces of advice they mentioned was that academics aren't always the most socially adroit individuals, and so don't be offended when you go on your job talks if someone does something cloddish. And being somebody who can identify with being cloddish, I thought, oh, I can understand this. And certainly I will tell you that when I went on job interviews, frequently something would happen where you wondered about people's social skills. So, but this book actually goes into much more detail about other aspects of managing your career, but has very nice sections about applying for graduate school and so forth. A colleague of mine who's very successful told me that he read this book on the plane to his very first job talk, and it actually changed how he interacted with people. So my first recommendation certainly would be to get this this book called The Complete Academic. I actually have both copies. I tend to buy various editions. I find that they have some things that are missing from the new edition and often is useful. The point that I'm trying to make is that you want to think pragmatically and programmatically about your career. And thinking pragmatically about your career, you want to ask yourself, where are you now in your training? Where is it that you want to be? And here on this slide I list things like you want to work at a university or a college or medical school, a community hospital, or in private practice, and be involved in scholarship. Nowadays we have lots of practitioners who actually are involved in scholarship, people like Jeffrey Magnavita, for instance, or Ray Levy at Mass General. You want to think about where it is that you want to be, what it is you want to be doing, and maybe even more broadly than simply what kind of institution do you want to be at, but what do you see yourself doing, and then what do you need to do to actually bridge that gap. And that takes a lot of investigative work. It's helpful to look at people who are doing the kind of things that you're doing and sort of manage their careers and what trajectories their careers have taken. Nowadays, it's relatively easy to find people's CVs online. and you can look at their CVs and sort of plot out sort of what their trajectory might have looked like. Who were their mentors, where did they go, what kind of things did they study, how have their publications evolved, et cetera, and use that as a map or a roadmap for yourself for how to bridge this gap between where you're at and where you want to be. You can also have very explicit conversations with mentors and colleagues about how one does this. There was recently an article in the New Yorker magazine here in the States about the importance of continued coaching, and it was an article written by a surgeon who essentially sort of noticed, as many of us may have, that athletes typically have coaches that coach them throughout their whole athletic career, and wondered whether he as a surgeon should actually have a coach watching what he does, how he performs in the operating room, and then making suggestions about how he might improve his work. And this article talks about that experience of hiring a retired surgeon to coach him, essentially. And this got me and a few of my colleagues here at Penn State just talking about setting up a group where we might coach each other. Often the way we plan our careers is very much in private, sometimes in conjunction with a mentor, but often you know, fleeting conversations and, you know, as part of other tasks, and you know, sometimes it's hard to sort of think this stuff out through and how one may want to actually proceed. I also sort of point out here that you should think programmatically about your programmatically about your research. And of course, I think that people nowadays are thinking much more programmatically about their research than when I graduated undergrad and started thinking about graduate school, where I think people often thought, you know, oh, I have an idea, I'll just test this idea out. But really, when you think about your research programmatically, you want to be thinking about what is it that you're interested in broadly, what's the big question that you're hoping to work towards, why is it important, and the way I often frame that is, why would anyone else care about the work that you're doing? What as a society might we want to know about the work that you're interested in? How will it have an impact on society for the greater good? What do we already know? You know, where are the gaps in the literature? What needs to be accomplished? How might one accomplish this? And this sort of gets us started on thinking about a big picture, down the road program of research that answers you know, large questions, and then what are the small steps that one might need to take to get there. I often teach a senior seminar here at Penn State where I have the students, the senior undergraduates, write mock grant proposals. And the TA and myself in meeting with them are frequently taken back by how big the questions people ask. They want to do essentially 25-year follow-up studies from infancy into young adulthood. And we tell them that that's a great question to have in one's mind that you're working towards, but you really need to be thinking about the feasibility of your questions and thinking more programmatically about what do you need to know to get to that larger question. So for instance, a funding institution doesn't want to give you 25 years of funding without you having some data to show that some of the assumptions in your model actually are valid. And so you might get a small grant to test certain issues that when you can show that those issues are valid, you are then allowed to sort of ask for more money to look at some larger issues. And you'd be amazed reviewing grants. I review grants occasionally for National Institute of Mental Health here, and I just was on a panel in October, and you'd be amazed at how many, even assistant professors will ask questions that are just not feasible. So this is sort of a general model that I take in sort of thinking about my career and sort of also talking to my graduate students and undergraduates about. Talking about programmatic research, it's planful. As I said, it asks big questions or has big questions at its heart, but you're going to ask a lot of smaller questions that eventually lead to the bigger questions. And it usually requires a number of things, including infrastructure to carry out, expertise on your part or its consultation, funding, often initially provided by the institution that you're working with or have been hired for. And then, of course, scholarship and dissemination, that, the ultimate purpose of the research that we do is actually to impact people for the better. And it also involves generativity. That is not just presenting and publishing, but also training junior colleagues, which, of course, SPR has been so wonderful at doing for so many years. It was conceptualized in the beginning. It was started by junior people, actually, and so it always had an appreciation of providing mentorship for junior people. And, of course, this webinar program that Sam and Kim and others have been so instrumental in is just another example of that. Sam is actually asking me now if this would be a good time for our poll, and I think that it would. So Sam's going to sort of send that out.
And the poll question is just generally, where are you in your career? Just to give a sense of sort of, where the audience is in general.
From a brief look at the attendees, it seems that people might be at various places, but the poll will certainly help us. I want to say a little bit about thinking about programmatic research and how one might actually conceptualize it. And there's two aspects to programmatic research that I often think about when writing grants or reviewing grants or thinking about my own work. And that is, what is the significance of the question, and what is the approach taken, and can the approach actually address the gap that's been identified in the literature? And so you want to be able to define what the problem is, and here you want to be actually thinking about being able to define your research, not in a way that, excuse me, you might communicate with colleagues in your area, but actually in a way that's very palatable to the average person. When you write grants, the first thing you realize is that you're writing not for you or people who think like you, but you're writing for people who may come from different areas or different backgrounds within psychology or psychiatry, and that you have to write. The first rule of grant writing is that you're writing for them. You're writing so that they can understand what it is that you want to do. So what is the problem that you're interested in? As I said earlier, what is known about that problem? Where are there gaps in our knowledge? What are the implications of these gaps? How does it create a problem? And then how might we actually fill that gap and essentially potentially resolve that problem?
And with 50% graduate students, 20% assistant professors, 10% undergrads, 10% postdocs.
Okay, so Sam conveyed to me that 50% of the people signed up are actually graduate students, about 20% are assistant professors, and then 10% undergrads and 10% postdocs. So it's quite a range. I think that I could pitch this to be relevant for all. Okay, that's useful information. Now with the approach, again, how do we essentially conceptualize plugging this gap that we've identified, and what are the methodologies that can be used to plug this gap? And here, one needs to, when I was thinking about this early on in my career, moving from being a graduate student to a intern and thinking about postdocs, I thought about postdocs the minute I arrived on my internship. I wasn't there more than 10 seconds, and I was already thinking about what was I going to be doing the year after, and how could I make that experience consistent with the experience I was having on an internship and the experience I had as a graduate student, so that I had a sense of coherence in my movement, but also making sure that those experiences actually built. So my dissertation, done in 2000, now a little over 10 years ago, essentially involved convenience samples and used survey methods and used standard statistical procedures. But I realized that I didn't want my research to sort of be framed that way. As I moved on in my career, I wanted research that that was more planful, that was more prospective, and that was using state-of-the-art conceptual and research methodology. And so that involves thinking about what kind of training you're going to get, and then how are you actually going to find those individuals or fund that. But all with the goal of figuring out how could I fill a gap in knowledge about the area that I think is important and interesting. Now, when thinking about goals, and this was a little bit implicit in what I just said, you try to conceptualize them in terms of long-term goals and short-term goals and in-between goals. And you want to balance your thinking of between these short-term goals and long-term goals. You want to be in the present and obviously take advantage of the opportunities that are available to you, but you don't want to lose sight of the future. And at the same time, you want to be mindful of the training and skills that you've already received and how they might present strengths to you or weaknesses in your background. And so I'm always trying to think about what's my immediate plan, what's my 1-year plan, my 2-year plan, my 3-year plan, my 5-year plan, 10-year plan, 20-year plan, etc. And I think that what I've noticed about people who I think have been very successful in their career is that when you look back at the unfolding of their career, it seemed very planful. It's almost as if they knew early on what they were hoping to accomplish 20 years later. Now, not all of us are always there. I'm certainly not, but I'm trying to think about it. And sometimes it's really hard because you can't conceptualize some of the developments that are going to happen in the field that will actually change how you think about your work or the questions that you're interested in. But you don't want to be so rigidly set in a 20-year plan that you're ignoring things that are happening in the field as they develop. But at the same time, you want to be thinking about where is it that you're hoping to be, what is it that you're hoping to do, what kind of questions, and how are you trying to think about answering those things. And of course, if those of you who are assistant professors and those of you who are postdocs have already been thinking this way, but clearly most likely the undergraduates have not at this point, and the graduate students may be starting to think this way. But you really have to be planful in thinking about your 1- and 2-year plans, because if you said to yourself today, I want to go out and do this study, X study, and it requires funding and money, it's going to take you a period of time to actually gather your ideas and present them in a way and consult with various people to actually be able to develop a grant. It'll probably take you about 9 months to a year to develop this grant. And then if it's a large grant, a shorter grant may take you only a few months, but then it has to coincide with the grant agency's funding dates and cycles, and then when you submit your grant, there's a period of time that you wait before it gets funded. Sometimes it doesn't get funded the first round or even the second round, and you have to resubmit. And so you can think of a project today, and it could take you a year or two before you're in a position to actually execute it, and you may actually need to gather preliminary or pilot data in order to be able to do that. So it's very important to be thinking about these plans down the road and what you need to be doing right now in order to be prepared to enact these plans at these various times. So I told you that when I started as an intern, I was thinking about postdocs. I took an internship at Cornell Medical School in Westchester. It was an excellent internship for my interest in borderline personality disorder, as both Otto Kernberg was on campus and John Clarkin as a methodologist, but also it was the second dialectical behavior therapy program in the country, second to Marsha Linehan's, and actually started by Marsha Linehan while she was at Cornell on a sabbatical. And so it was really presented a nice opportunity for me, and I wanted to stay there very badly. They were actually just had received some money for a treatment development grant, and I wanted to actually be part of that. And I knew that if I couldn't stay on as a postdoc, that wherever I was going to have to be doing this on my own time with them. I immediately actually started writing an F-32 award. An F-32 is in the United States is a training fellowship for postdocs. In the United States, we have F-31s and F-32s, which are individual training grants for pre-docs F-31s and then postdocs F-32s. We have other mechanisms in addition to those, but I started writing this almost from day one. and submitted the grant. I started my internship in July. I submitted that grant in October, and in December I got it back, and it was unfunded. And I was devastated. But actually, I had done a well enough job on the grant. The reviews were sufficiently strong that the person I was working with, my mentor, John Clarkin, took the grant to the department chair and actually asked for some funding to fund me for the next year so that I could actually resubmit that grant. So an unfunded grant actually got me funding for my postdoc. And so that's an example of, I think, luck favoring the prepared, in that, you know, I did my best on that grant. They actually had a reasonable critique of it. One reviewer gave it a very good score, another had a strong critique of it. I won't go into all the details at this point. But but even as day one on my internship, I was thinking about how I was going to actually get the funding to continue doing what I wanted to be doing. And so you need to be thinking about your goals in this way. What is the best way to get from where you are to where you want to be? You want to also be thinking about your professional identity, who you are and who you want to be. And this is actually, you know, this idea about where it is that you want to go in your career is not only a function of what it is that you want to do, but also in terms of what society is willing to let you do. If you wanted to study something that no one really cared about, you could do it if you were independently wealthy, but you might not be able to do it otherwise. And so there's always this interaction between what it is you want to do and what's expected of you, either by the institution that hires you, the society that we live in, funding agencies, etc. And so there's always this tension about how best to do that. People do work it out in various ways. When I was, before I applied to graduate school, I worked in a medical school in New Haven, and there were a number of people there who were interested in psychodynamic theory and psychodynamic therapy, but whose research was actually in neuroscience and autism. And it was really hard for me to see how those two things actually fit together. But the research in neuroscience and autism, I think now I recognize that it was related in some small conceptual way that I couldn't recognize, such as theory of mind and how people think about themselves. At the time I couldn't recognize. It seemed very disconnected. I very much didn't want to be doing research in one area to keep to earn my keep and have interest in other areas. There's a tension. You want to try to figure it out. Part of that is you're being able to convince other people that what you do is important, and obviously you need to know that yourself if you're going to convince others. I have this bullet point about informed consent. I put that there because I have a colleague in particular who I think complains frequently about all that we do in the field, or everything that we have to do. And trust me, I just did a report for my chair in my department, and I still work 80 hours a week. And obviously, it's a lot, and leaves people feeling sometimes tired and run down, and sometimes you're doing things that don't let you get to the work that you really most want to do. But I always sort of joke with my colleague that we had informed consent when we came into the field, and we knew that this was going to be a lot of work and very hard, but it's also quite rewarding. I always make the distinction about whether people complain about having too much to do or not enough time to do what they want to do. And I think if you complain about not having enough time, you probably cut or have the right attitude for this field. Okay. Now, it's important to think about where you might need to be or where you should be at different points in your career, and this might actually relate very nicely to the poll just done. So in terms of various aspects of what you should be doing, it's different, obviously, if you're a graduate student or a psychology intern or postdoc, or an assistant professor, an associate professor, or a professor. And what I thought I would do is sort of outline some of the issues that we have to be concerned about and how it might look different at various points in our career. And so obviously, the things that we need to be concerned about are the research that we're doing, the studies that we're actually doing. publications and maybe by extension presentations, but more so publications. Funding, funding not just for the sake of funding and just for the sake of the university, who my experience is fallen madly, deeply in love with funding as a way of dealing with other financial pressures, but funding because it actually allows us to get the work done that we want to do. And then citizenship, which includes things like being on committees, editing for journals, conference chairing, etc. And these are all aspects that are important to our career in terms of allowing us to do the kind of work that we want to do and setting up the infrastructure for the kind of work that we want to do broadly in terms of societies, specifically in terms of maybe our own labs. Now, as a graduate student, and I suspect that many of the people here have already done this, your tasks are, about joining relevant societies and attending conferences. You may start attending these conferences as an attendee, or presenting posters and then papers, maybe having the opportunity to chair a panel, having the opportunity to present a paper in a panel where your mentor may have arranged a discussant of note that gives you the opportunity to network and meet with people and for other people to get to know your work, but also can act as a draw to the panel that you're on and allow other people to see your work. And of course, one of the things you want to be doing when you're in an organization or attending conferences is learning about how one might manage their career and becoming more visible. And eventually, as you go on the job market, you want to be peaking at these conferences. Excuse me. You want to be thinking about your publications. Often people in graduate school may have worked with others as an undergraduate or in jobs before they went to graduate school, and you want to finish up those publications that are from prior to graduate school. You want to finish. You don't want those things lingering on throughout your graduate career. You may have continued collaborations with these previous mentors, and of course you have to sort of you have to manage the tension of the work that you need to be doing in your current lab. But you want to be finishing up those publications, doing your masters, writing various chapters with people you work with, and also this thing here called freebies. These are additional opportunities for publication in addition to masters and minors and dissertations and other things that might be required of your university. And actually, as I say this, I'm aware that in Europe, the dissertation tends to be much more involved and involves a series of studies that then does result in a number of papers, excuse me, and is often helpful in one's academic career.
Kim has a question.
Sure. Sam's indicating that Kim has a question.
Yes, hi Ken. I was wondering, what is the normal amount of publications first authored or other authors, like second or third authored, that is sort of expected from a graduate student who has just finished grad school?
So Kim asked an excellent question, and this and Kim, which I assume everyone heard, about what is sort of the expected number of publications, and here I would say that it's probably a moving target. I know that when I started as an assistant professor at Penn State, the very first thing they said to us in a group orientation is, don't be looking to your senior colleagues for, as models of how many publications you should have. The standard is evolving, and you'll be expected to do more, which of course then led me to have the reverent thought that essentially that means I'm being evaluated by people who might not be able to get tenure with the same standards that I'm going to be evaluated with, which of course actually isn't necessarily true here at Penn State, because we have 45 faculty members, and I would say that none of them are what we would call in academia dead wood, and most of them are people you could model yourself after. But anyway, what is that number? And the standard, I think, is evolving. When early on in my career here at Penn State, I was on a a search committee, and what I noticed was that all the applicants that we were considering seriously had at least 8 publications, I would say. They had, and it broke down in a particular way, and of course I don't want to be formulaic about this because I think this changes, but they had 8 publications, 4 of which were first author, 4 of which were not, 4 of which were empirical, 4 of which were not, and then 1 of 2 of them tended to be top-tier publications. They didn't necessarily need to be first author on that top-tier publication, but most often they were. And it differs if you're a graduate student applying right out of graduate school, or if you finished a year or 2 or 3 years of postdoc. I will say that my sense was people didn't look at when you started your graduate program. Oh, this person got out in 4 years, 5 years. No one seemed to look at that. Everyone was looking at the end point of where they were now and looking at the number of publications. So my sense was that typically postdocs had a huge advantage because they had more publications. And the range was, I'd say, 8 to 15 to start. It was rare for people to have 15 or more than 8, generally speaking, but usually the typical person we were considering was a graduate student in clinical psychology who was just finishing their internship, and they tended to have about 8 publications, as I just said. But I think it changes over time, and certainly may be different at different institutions and in different countries and so forth. But that's what I've noticed. The other thing I've noticed recently is that our graduate students in our graduate program here at Penn State are having 8 to 10 publications as they go off on internship. And so I imagine that when they apply for jobs, they'll have 10 or 12. Remember, when you go on internship, usually your dissertation isn't published yet. So you're talking about your master's. We have a minor project here, a couple of chapters with faculty members, a few freebies, and then eventually your dissertation gets published and becomes part of that. So that's my sense from what I've seen. And I'd be curious what other people have either seen or experienced, but that's, again, it's an evolving standard. And I think that I've noticed, for instance, that even just applying for internship, the number of publications that students has is far greater. I don't know if
well, thank you.
To a follow-up question or. Okay.
I'm done, but maybe other people have questions. I don't see any raised hands though, but okay. So let's just continue.
Okay.
Muted.
I want to be thinking about funding, even as a graduate student.
Unmuted.
Applicants, when I was on the search committee, actually had funding as graduate students. In the United States, there's mechanisms through NSF, the National Science Foundation, as well as this F-31 grant that I had told you about earlier from NIMH. And there's also small grants that people can get to help fund their research. But it creates the appearance of understanding the context of what we do and being geared towards that context. Also, if you get funding at the NSF or NIH level, the funding essentially covers, releases you from any obligations to the university for being a teaching assistant or a research assistant or any other type of assistantship, and then essentially frees you up full time to be working on your dissertation and related projects. Another thing that you may want to become involved in is editing, journal editing with as an ad hoc reviewer with a mentor. Not all mentors ask their students to be involved in reviewing with them, but you can ask your mentor if there's any, if he or she gets any reviews that might be in your area that you'd be interested in helping. They can help you sort of think about how best to write it up, etc. Sometimes a mentor may be organizing a conference and people have opportunities to help with that. I know when my colleague Lou Castengay ran the conference in Santiago, a number of his graduate students helped him with that. When I recently was the program chair for CEPI's conference, a very talented undergraduate who's now a graduate student helped me with that. So there's opportunities there. Also mentoring undergraduates in the lab. I was talking with Kim earlier. It seems as if there's in Europe there's plenty of opportunities to do that. Here in the United States, I would say there are too. It's often individual differences in graduate students. Some graduate students tend to like doing that kind of stuff, some less so, but it's worthwhile to do. As an intern and postdoc, you want to increase your visibility at conferences. This is when you're going to be launching. You may want to be involved in organizations as student rep or an organizer. Obviously, you can do that as a graduate student too, as evidenced by the fact that Kim and Sam do this kind of stuff with SPR. Here I say that your publications related to Kim's question should be at least 3 to 5 at this point, but preferably 8 based on what I was telling you earlier. Your dissertation should be in review or review and revise and resubmit, and you should be beginning to work on publications from your postdoc, which will then contribute to having more publications as you do actually launch. You may want to be thinking about other grant funding now, F-32s or K awards. Those are funding mechanisms within the United States. I don't know if they have comparable mechanisms in Europe. I do know some countries in Europe seem to have travel grants that will pay a person to come to the United States and work with somebody. I think actually pays a stipend and fees, and this is seen as useful in people's training, maybe even prestigious, and so that's a useful thing to do too. I'm not sure that if you're from a foreign country that you can't apply for actually NIH funding in the United States. I have seen people from other countries, I guess I would say England and Canada, and I don't know whether it matters which country you're from, actually apply and receive funding from our National Institute of Mental Health. And actually I know of somebody who got a K award in Israel. Now her mentor was here in the United States and she had worked with that person. So I think there are opportunities even to utilize funding mechanisms here in the United States for one's research through F-32s or K awards. Here you want to up your editing, hopefully doing ad hoc reviews either with a mentor as a student reviewer, sometimes even doing your own reviews. I have a couple of students who have done reviews with me and who have developed expertise in a particular area, somewhat even independent of mine, and have publications as first author in those areas, and they've been asked to review for psychotherapy research, for instance, on their own. And certainly if you can be doing that, that's fantastic. Again, here, organizing conferences or mentoring RAs and so forth, important to do. Now, here's where things get a little bit more involved. As you start your job as an assistant professor, now some of you guys are assistant professors and probably been thinking about this. Others, you know, are obviously graduate students, and you need to be thinking about this too. You know, what is it that I need to be doing as an assistant professor? What might I be doing as an associate professor? Why do I need to know what I need to do as an associate professor when I'm a graduate student? Well, when you become an assistant professor, you don't want to be doing those things that you would do as an associate professor because it's out of order and out of turn, and you got to do first things first, and mainly not get overburdened. Most time for an assistant professor, what you really need to do is you really need to establish yourself in terms of scholarship, in terms of publications. And so you don't want to get too bogged down doing certain things that might be something that's more appropriate for an associate professor or a full professor to be doing in terms of journal editing, for instance, and I'll say more about that. So obviously you want to be visible at conferences and societies. You want to be presenting regularly. You want to be on visible panels if possible. Here your mentors are still very involved in your life. Of course, your mentors are always involved in your life. I tell my undergraduates when they're applying to graduate school that next to picking a spouse, the most significant relationship you pick in your life is that of your mentor, and for mentors is that of your mentees. These are relationships that last your whole life, and you are responsible for your mentees not only for the time that they're in graduate school, but afterwards in helping them get jobs and nominated for awards and promoted, et cetera, et cetera. And so your mentor should help you with panels, or you might take the lead sort of organizing a panel, but your mentor might be helpful in getting that very prestigious discussant involved, or you may at this point have cultivated relationships as through SPR or other organizations, and may be able to invite people on your own. But you want to be doing this. Most likely, you will need 15 or 20 publications by tenure. These publications will most likely need to be empirical rather than chapter. Most likely be first author. Your students' master's theses and other work that they've been doing with you should be published too, to show that you can actually mentor a student from in the research project, research process to publication. And you need to have publications as an assistant professor that are independent of your mentor. And this is really important. This is a place where a lot of people get hung up. And so it's important that your mentor actually also understand this and be able to allow you some independence. And I have found that this is one area where mentors are often very blind, that they may not recognize it because the system that they're in may not see it as an issue. They may not recognize it for other reasons, such as wanting to continue to publish with you and develop these joint projects. But it is very important that you develop some level of independence. It doesn't mean that you can't publish with your mentor necessarily, but it means that you have to make sure that you have publications that are independent of your mentor. And this actually is different from school to school. I had a colleague who was at a university who told her that no publication with her mentor on it would be counted towards her tenure. Now that's a highly unusual statement, I believe, but you need to be aware of what will count and what won't count when you do this. In terms of funding, when you're an assistant professor, you want to be thinking of smaller grants that will get you pilot data that can then be used to write grants for larger grants. Here in the United States, at least, we have different levels of grant, the highest level, the holy grail, being called an R01. And they generally will not give out an R01 to somebody who hasn't had an R03 or an R21, a smaller grant, to show that, A, you can manage a grant and that you're ready for a bigger grant, but also so that you could actually have an opportunity to develop publications that will also benefit your getting this larger grant. And so you want to be thinking within the scope of what you need to be doing. I would tell an assistant professor, a new assistant professor coming here to Penn State, first thing you do is you write this R03, you finish publishing up the things that you did prior to getting here, you start collecting data immediately, and you start thinking about who your letter writers might be for your tenure evaluation, which is important because at different institutions your letter writers can be various people. At Penn State, for instance, a letter writer can't be anybody who A, either served in a mentoring capacity to you, or B, that you're a co-author with. So, you get this wonderful opportunity to co-author a paper with a well-known psychologist, and you're excited, but it also means that that person could be scratched off your list of people who could write you a letter for tenure. And so you have to be aware of those things. You can't be writing with every famous person in the field that's interested in working with you, because you might actually eliminate everyone available to write your tenure letters. And these are the kind of things that you need to be thinking of. Usually the people who have reviewed your grants, who have reviewed your papers for journals, who have seen your presentations at conferences, these people will be able to serve as letter writers for you. Going on here with editing, or actually let's back up to the conference and societies. You might want to join certain committees. You don't want to take on huge, large roles on these committees because they will take away time from your publishing. But you do want to be on these committees in ways that will allow you to actually have more involvement later on. So if you were a committee member, that often allows you after your tenure to be a committee chair, which then may allow you to chair another committee that's larger and more to your liking. And the same things with conferences. You might want to be on a program committee. You might chair a small conference. I have a colleague who's chairing a one-day conference that's a pre-conference to a larger conference. I don't think you want to do a large conference because, again, that would take too much effort and take away from your productivity. You start reviewing for journals, and you want to review with the goal that you might be asked to join an editorial board. Typically, there are two ways that you get asked to join an editorial board. One is that you have published in that journal a number of times, and people think of you as somebody who could review on that particular topic. And the other is that you've reviewed ad hoc, and people have liked your reviews and asked you to join the editorial board. Here, mentoring of students becomes really important. One of the things that you'll be evaluated as an assistant professor is, can you mentor students? Have your students published their master's theses? Are they getting internships and postdocs? And often, as you come up for tenure, you still haven't had a student get a job, but are they on a trajectory where they look like they'll be employable? Are your students happy with you? Are they getting the things that they need out of you? And that also means selecting the right students for your lab and to help you get it up and going. And I would say, as I just said, this is one of the most important decisions you'll make in your career, at least early on, is picking students that will help you get the work done that you need to get done and not interfere with that work. So you really want to make sure you're picking psychologically healthy people who, really are capable of doing the work. I have this joke I tell when I'm interviewing students for graduate school, and I use it as part of my decision process, listening to where they laugh. It goes like this. There's a faculty member and two graduate students walking along the beach, and I apologize if anyone's heard this joke before. But this faculty member and two graduate students are walking along a beach, and one of them accidentally kicks this tin can, and it turns out that it's not a can at all. It's actually a lamp. It looks like a genie lamp. And so they wipe off the sand, and out comes this giant genie. And the genie says, you have 3 wishes. And one of the graduate students says to the faculty member, can we split the wishes up? And the faculty member says, certainly. And so the other graduate student says, can I go first? And the faculty member says, sure. And the graduate student says to the genie, I wish I was on a tropical island with a gorgeous woman. And the genie snaps his fingers, and boom, the graduate student disappears onto this island. And the other graduate student says, can I go next? Can I go next? And the faculty member says, sure. And the graduate student says to the genie, I wish I was in Hawaii with a gorgeous hunk. And the genie snaps his fingers, and boom, the graduate student disappears to Hawaii. And then the genie says to the faculty member, and what about your wish? And the faculty member says, I wish they were both back in my lab. And boom, back in the lab they go. And I listen to where the person I'm telling the joke laughs. If they groan and they're identified with the students on the beach, I know they're not from my lab. And if they laugh with the faculty member, I know that they're probably identified enough with the process that they might work well in my lab. Not a litmus test for sure, but it does show you the attitude of what you want when picking students. You want somebody who's going to be hardworking and help you get things going. Now, it's hard when students work with assistant professors because there's often less opportunities, but sometimes there's actually some very exciting opportunities too. Yes. Oh, Sam's asking me to briefly describe the concept of tenure, which may be different in Europe, and I will describe how it works here, and I'm kind of curious how it would work in Europe. I know a little bit about this, at least in some countries, but in the United States, when you get hired for an academic position, there's a number of different ways you could be hired, and probably the one that we're all seeking is what's called tenure track. And tenure is a process by which your job is actually guaranteed once you achieve this tenure. And this was set up this way, and I actually thought that this was a European concept. This was set up this way to ensure academic freedom. The idea is that once I'm tenured and I know that my job is safe, I can study what I think is best to study and not worry about pressures from people above that might want me to do various things for them or do various things and not other things. And the idea is that overall, if everyone's doing what they think is most important without this being encumbered by these demands by various people, that's how knowledge will be created in the most optimal way. That that somebody doing their own thing will come up with something that will essentially revolutionize things, and that if people didn't have that freedom, that would be less likely to happen. So we have this tenure system in which, after a certain number of years, usually anywhere between 5 and 7, most typically 6, you get evaluated for whether you're going to get this tenure where you're now going to be essentially protected and unable to be fired unless you kill somebody. That process they take very seriously, because if they give it to you, you're there the rest of your career, and they may not, and unless you do something really horrific, they're not going to be able to get rid of you. And so they want to make sure that they're only tenuring the best and most creative individuals. And there is this thing that happens sometimes, which is called dead wood, in which people sometimes get tenured and then sort of get lazy or burnt out. It's relatively rare, but it's very visible when it happens, because the person's going to be in their job for 30 years, getting the salary, et cetera, et cetera. Excuse me. So this is a very big evaluation that happens, and you get evaluated throughout your career in various ways for promotion, from assistant to associate to professor, et cetera. There are other evaluations too that happen, but this is really the most important one, and the one that you need to be most concerned about. If you don't get tenure, essentially your career can be over. Now, there are other types of positions. There are non-tenured track positions, there are adjunct positions, etc., and those don't come with the same benefits, same resources, the same salaries, etc. And so there's a lot of advantages for this tenure track position for doing research. Sure. Sam's going to interrupt for a second.
So I just want to remind people that we've got about 25 minutes left. If you have questions, please start writing them in, and then I'll make sure that Ken gets a chance to respond to your questions. But in the absence of questions, we're just going to have Ken continue on with the presentation for as long as possible.
Okay. I'm happy to sort of break into a group where we're asking questions. I didn't realize that time has flown as fast as it did. I certainly have a bit more here to present, but I'm happy to sort of get into discussions if people want to get into discussion. So I'll keep going, and Sam will let me know. As an associate professor, or moving from associate professor to full professor, there are certain things that are expected of you. Publishing in top-tier journals, more so than even before. Funding at this R01 level that I had discussed. Being more visible at conferences, organizing your students' panels, or helping students organize panels, making sure that they have that. Conference chairing, large conferences, becoming an associate editor, eventually maybe an editor. These are all important tasks in terms of your visibility, also in terms of your influence on the field. I will say that two of the things that I've been involved in where I thought I've had the most influence, more so, I hate to say, than maybe even my publications, and I hope that that's not necessarily true, but it certainly can feel that way, has been actually grant reviewing and journal reviewing. Here you actually can help shepherd through projects and papers that you think will impact the field. And as an ad hoc editor, you do that one article at a time. It feels very difficult. As an associate editor, or as an editor, you're doing that in a very efficient way. And if you really want to have an impact on the field, I think eventually you want to be an associate editor or an editor or chair of a grant review panel or something of that level. Of course, the mentoring job changes. You're trying to get your students in jobs, and you're trying to help them develop independence and get tenure themselves.
So can we have a question?
Sure.
A question from Justin Smith. Justin, I'm going to open up your microphone in a second so you can ask it in person. And if that doesn't work, I'll just read your question to Ken. But we like to open up the mics first. So hang on 1 second. Okay, Justin, your mic is open, so why don't you try and chat with Ken?
Sure. Ken, do you have any specific advice for writing applications for research positions beyond just demonstrating that you've got the necessary training and have accomplished sufficiently in publication to warrant even being considered? How do you kind of make yourself stand out?
Yeah. This is an excellent question. And actually something I did mean to talk about, and actually don't think I actually ended up preparing a slide for, so this is an opportunity for me to bring this to people's attention. When you apply for a job, you're going to create a number of different documents. You're going to have a cover letter. You're going to have a statement of research. You're going to have a statement of teaching. You're going to have your CV. You're going to have your publications. You may not include all of them because you may have too many, but you'll include the top publications. You'll include teaching evaluations and so forth. But really the two most important aspects besides your CV, obviously, and the letters of recommendation that will come in later, really is the cover letter and the statement of research. The cover letter is important because it allows you to actually pull things together in certain ways and to highlight in a short space, a page, why you might be a good applicant for the position that you're applying to. And the statement of research is going to be where you're really going to elaborate that more fully. And the statement of research is typically about 3.5 pages, and you want to organize it in such a way that you're not simply reiterating what's on your CV, saying first I did this, then I did that, then I did this. What you really want to do is you want to fill in the narrative that provides for the university or the committee that's evaluating you your understanding of the work you're doing, why it's important, what the likely outcomes, how it's likely to impact the field, and so forth. And so it's important to do that. I will tell you that when I applied to graduate school, I thought that was the hardest thing I ever did in my life. And then when I applied for internship, I thought that was the hardest thing I ever did for my life. Sam's sitting behind me, and he's in that process now. And those both compelled greatly to when I applied for faculty positions. That literally was the hardest thing I did in my life until I prepared my tenure portfolio. It gets harder and harder. Luckily, we get better and better, more capable of doing these things. But I would say that by the time you're getting to the point of applying for jobs, most people have these kind of narrative statements about their research, and most people are standing out. I think the issue is this. How much do you match what they're looking for in the job? And often when we post jobs, we put it broad. We broad net. But we may have specific things we're actually looking for. So I'll tell you, I applied for a job at Penn State the year before I got it. So the year before I applied for this job, and I didn't hear anything. Didn't think much of it. You apply for a lot of jobs and you hear from various places. The next year, there was a job open, and I applied for it, and then I made their short list. And I don't think too much was different about my application. My guess is the committee was slightly different, and my guess is that what they were looking for might have sort of coalesced in a way that was closer to the work that I did. And that's what I've seen when I've been on these review committees. There are really good people who don't get considered mainly because, well, we're looking for someone who does marital therapy. This person doesn't do that. Now, occasionally, someone stands out mainly because they have more publications in top-tier journals, or they have some indication of funding success. Or they have letters of recommendation from somebody saying, that they're the next, superstar. So that's what I see. But you really, these various things that I just outlined, you really have to make sure that they're pithy. 3.5 pages is not a lot of space to talk about your research, and you really want to make sure that what's important about your work is popping out. I use little tricks when I write these kind of things, or when I write grants. I often will say, I'll say something and I'll say, this is important because. I don't rely on the fact that I can expect that the reader will recognize why this is important. You want to actually bring it to their attention. One particularly vexing issue that psychotherapy researchers have been grappling with is X. This is important because if resolution of this issue would allow us to do Y, and by doing that, your essay's popping out more. It also tells them that you know how to promote your work. Now, you don't want to be so promotional that you come off looking like somebody who might be difficult. You want to show rather than simply say you want it to be apparent to people.
All right, we have a couple more questions. The next one I'm going to have to read because the person doesn't have a mic. The next question is, how do you keep your motivation burning even when you face difficulties like papers getting rejected and constant delays in your projects?
Well, I guess I have. That's an excellent question, and for different people, they're going to do it different ways. My way of dealing with it is this: what other alternative do I have? I have to just keep pushing forward. Now, the one thing I was really concerned about that felt really monumental to me was not necessarily a publication here, publication there. Was tenure, because I didn't know whether I was going to be able to continue doing what I wanted to do. But I felt that if I took care of what I needed to do in terms of my publications and so forth, that would fall into place. I think one of the things you have to do is you don't want to avoid, you don't want to waste time. You want to be very timely because someone could scoop you. I've had that happen a number of times. That papers I submitted, I get a letter back from the editor saying we just got something like this that we've accepted. You should take it somewhere else. So that kind of stuff will happen. But I think that perseverance, people who make it in this field will tell you about failure after failure after failure, whether it's about being scooped, whether it's about not getting an article done in time to be sort of timely or at the head of the curve. These things will happen. Not getting grant funding, that's the biggest thing we talk about nowadays. It's so hard to get grant funded here, that that's a big conversation. We just keep pushing through. Because what alternative do we have? Now, could you repeat the question again? Because there was another aspect to it that I wanted to actually respond to. How do you keep your motivation?
Through
rejections,
publications that get rejected, grants that get rejected.
Yeah, my feeling is, I remember what I want to say. Besides that, the other thing that often happens to me is I get angry about it. Now, I think most people get angry about it too, and you kind of can't get so angry that you fly off the handle and start writing editors and things like that, or get so angry that you can't really see the value. So usually the typical process for me is I get the review. I'm like, oh, this is really stupid. I can't believe the person obviously didn't read my article well enough. They didn't understand what I was saying, et cetera, et cetera. And then that calms down over a day or two. And then I go back to it and I look at it and I see, oh, actually I see I wasn't so clear over here. I guess they were right about this. That's actually a really good point. I think that will make my paper a lot better. I try to, and then I use that anger, the emotion, to get it done. Sometimes I'll sit there. I had a paper rejected recently from a journal where the review was actually really good. It gave me a great idea about how to respond to it, and I thought, what, if I actually do what this reviewer suggests, I think I could send it to a better journal. And I felt empowered by that. So you have to use that kind of stuff. Realize that people are trying to help you, and often the comments are good. You just have to stick with the work. I do have a colleague. Once he gets a rejected paper, he never does anything with it. And I always take my rejected papers and I try to find a home for them. That's an idea I have. Every paper needs a home.
All right, we have more questions.
Sure.
The next one is from Isel. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Isel, I'm going to open up your microphone to see if you can ask Ken in person your question. Okay, your mic is now open, so if you have a mic, go ahead and talk.
Okay, hi Ken, thank you for this webinar. I was just wondering about something about publishing that I find sometimes journals want us to include some statistical methods that we haven't learned in the graduate school, like, analyzing the data on H&M, that kind of work. Mm-hmm. So I was just wondering, what do you suggest that we do in such cases?
This is an excellent question, and here's something I will, often we get asked to do things that we don't actually have training in. And when I think about what the PhD is about, it's really about training a person to actually be able to get additional training. There's all the time I'm going to sort of come up against things I don't know, and I have to develop expertise in it. Oh, I'm interested in this idea, how it relates to this thing. Well, I have expertise in this, but not in that. Now I have to develop that expertise, and because I was trained with my PhD, I know how to actually train myself to develop that expertise. And nowhere is that more apparent than in statistics, and no more. And I think that's true nowadays more than ever. The statistics that I learned in graduate school, and I think every graduate student is going to be able to say this in their career, The statistics I learned in graduate school are completely inadequate for the kinds of things I need to be doing. Now, some of the theoretical aspects that I learned about statistics are not, sampling issues and all sorts of other issues about independence of data and so forth. You take it into any kind of analysis that you're going to do. But, I didn't learn HLM in graduate school, and I didn't learn SEM in graduate school and so forth. So these are things that we have to, as professionals, either collaborate with people who have expertise in that, in which case we still have to learn the basics about it, because we're going to be writing about the results, or we have to actually develop that expertise ourselves. Now, frequently, as faculty members, we do this other thing, which is that we have graduate students that develop expertise in it, like Sam and Kim, and we rely on them, but really we need to actually learn it ourselves anyway. So for instance, I have a sabbatical coming up next year, and the way I'm spending my sabbatical is at the Methodology Center here at the Penn State campus, working with someone named Peter Molinar, who is, someone Sam learned statistics from and just an unbelievable expert in various aspects of this. And my goal is to actually know the stats better than my graduate students when I come out of that for a time being, because eventually those statistics will be inadequate, and my graduate students that I have will be learning new things that I didn't learn that I'll have to learn on another sabbatical or some other way. So I think that, you really have to, you have two choices. Either you say, I'm going to do it the way I did it because I think it's right. So, because I've had that happen. Somebody says, oh, you should be doing this newfangled statistic, and it turns out that they don't really understand that that wasn't the right thing to be doing. And then, you talk to somebody that helps you formulate the argument. So if I believe I'm right, I'll stick to the way I'm doing it. Or I say, I could send this to another journal that won't really care so much about this. But ultimately, for me, the test is the reviewer correct in suggesting this type of analysis? Or and if so, then in order for me to produce the best product that I want to produce, I feel like I have to either engage with somebody who knows how to do that, or learn it myself. My graduate student and I, we just got an article into Psych Assessment, which is the top-tier journal in assessment psychology, and it was a great learning process. My graduate student had more statistical expertise than I did. We did it a particular way, but the reviews came back asking us to do certain things. At first, we were like, "Oh, no, they're wrong," and we tried to argue it. They got another reviewer in who actually was able to explain it to us, so that we realized we weren't right and they weren't wrong. And we ended up doing it, that we learned something. I think we now have a state-of-the-art paper that other people will cite as, this is how you do this. So that's my suggestion about that.
So the next question comes from Thaddeus. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Thaddeus, I'm going to open up your mic and give you a chance to ask Ken your question yourself.
Hello?
Yeah, okay. Hi. Thank you, Ken, for this great webinar. I have a question regarding mentoring. Since I'll be applying next year for a doctorate program, I was wondering how to look for a mentor if I don't want to limit myself to who's available around me.
That's a really great question. Probably, as we would say here in the United States, the 64,000 or now the $64 million question. There's a number of things that go into picking a mentor. Obviously, the first thing should be, do they have expertise in the kind of things that you want to develop expertise in? Now, they don't have to have all the expertise that you need. There may be other people at the university that have other expertise that can supplement it. But they certainly should have certain expertise that you think you need, and probably the expertise that you think you need most immediately. When you go on postdoc, you're going to be getting additional expertise. And so you'll have opportunities to get things that you might have missed in graduate school. But you really want to make sure you're getting the basic of what you want to know. For instance, for me, I picked a graduate school and a graduate mentor, and mentors actually. I feel like I had 3 mentors really in graduate school who represented the things that I thought I needed most basically, in the most basic way. And then I went on to internship and postdoc and got things that I couldn't get from them. The second thing you really want to be thinking about, because this relationship is so important and you're going to be so intimate with this person and so close to this person, you're really going to live in close quarters with them, and they're going to be responsible for helping you, is you want to make sure that you like them personally. No one wants to hang out with people that they don't necessarily like. I think that's a tough situation, and so you want to make sure that they're, now sometimes that's hard to tell. you can't tell from an hour-long interview. I can't tell when I'm meeting with a potential mentee if I'm going to like them 4 years from now, and they can't tell that either. That's why going to places like SPR is so great, because you can see people, you can watch them, you can see how they interact, you can see how other people respond to them, and you can see whether, do they have the kind of personality that you think you might like. There's a third thing, and this is really hard to quantify: work styles. I have interviewed students who I liked and who I thought were brilliant, but who I could tell had a work style that might drive me crazy. I work in here's the one thing: when you're a graduate student, Sam might agree with this. When you're a graduate student, you have to you have to be prepared to contort yourself to your mentor's work style more so than them to you. And so, you have to think, what are the limits of how I like to work? Are you a last-minute person? Are you an early person? Where are the problems that you have? Do those fit with things that your mentor can tolerate? All those kind of things. And mentors calibrate to their mentees too. You don't, but it has to be within a range that's acceptable to both parties. You can't sort of contort yourself into something you're not. I think you'll be unhappy. So I always say content area and, capacity to mentor, personality, and work style. And some of these things are just really hard to know, and you have to talk to a lot of people. I always tell students, talk to people about people's mentoring styles, but take it with a grain of salt. Remember, who you're talking to and what kind of things might bother them and what kind of things don't bother them. So if they tell you, oh, this really bothered me about this person, and you're like, well, that's not the kind of thing that bothers me. Well, then that's not important. I hope that helps. But I would look broadly. When I was applying to graduate school, I thought, well, I just hope the person I want to work with doesn't live in Alaska.
So we're going to wrap up for today, given that it's just about 12:30. So I want to thank Ken.
Muted. Unmuted.
We got accidentally muted. Sorry
about that. We got muted. I want to thank Ken for his generous gift of time and his wisdom. I want to make a couple of last-minute announcements. Please, if you haven't already, take a look at and join the SPR site on Facebook if you're a student member. It's a great site for connecting with students before conferences and asking the type of questions that Ken's talking about. And also, Kim and I are looking for a couple of additional people to participate in the planning and engagement process for webinars. So if you are interested, please contact either me or Kim. You can do that through the Facebook site. You can find us on online. And I assume that since most of you got the invitation for this webinar, you also have our email addresses. So with that, thank you all very much for coming and for making this 6th SPR webinar so successful. And we look forward to the 7th. I have to end this. Maybe you do. I do. Oh, you do. Stop sharing screen.
I had a lot more slides, unfortunately.
Webinar. Yeah, I know. I still have to.